There were cuts around the eyes. There were cuts to the mouth area, and extensive cuts, numerous cuts, across from one side to the other, across the midline, to the neck structures, which extended right through the soft tissues of the neck, the windpipe, almost to the back of the neck.
Professor Busuttil was the pathologist who examined Jodi's body.
This girl would have had in her about 5 to 5.5 litres of blood, most of which has left the body before she died. Now, we're not talking of a few drops, we're talking of litres of blood. Therefore, if there was this intimate contact, one would have expected some of the blood of the deceased to have transferred itself onto a person who's assaulting her.
What steps would have to have been taken by the offender to prevent this swapping of trace evidence?
Wearing gloves, wearing a covering over his clothing or his body, possibly wearing goggles, wearing something over his head, ensuring that there is no direct contact between his clothing and his body and the deceased.
Luke Mitchell and the rest of the family search party were taken to different police stations. There, Luke Mitchell had his nails scraped for forensic evidence and his clothes taken for examination. His body was also examined by a police doctor. He had no evidence of fresh cuts or scratches. Yet Professor Busuttil testified that Jodi had severe defensive injuries, suggesting she had put up a violent struggle. The police were convinced that with such a brutal and bloody murder, the forensic tests on Luke Mitchell's clothing, his hair and his nails would provide conclusive proof of his guilt. But the tests found nothing. There was no incriminating evidence of Jodi Jones on Luke Mitchell. If the police investigators had said, Professor, how likely is it that the person who killed Jodi had her blood on him?
Very likely.
How likely is it, Professor, that there would have been hair, skin, sweat, saliva, anything from Jodi Jones on our attacker?
Not as likely as blood, but quite likely. It doesn't tell us it couldn't have been him, but it makes it surprising and less likely indeed that it was him.
When the results from Jodi's body came back, there was also no incriminating trace of Luke Mitchell on her. Police procedure dictates every step should be taken to protect a crime scene. But despite rain that evening, Jodi's body remained uncovered overnight until 8 o'clock the following morning.
Now, if it weren't preserved, there is a possibility, indeed if it were raining as it was, a probability, that some evidence may have been lost.
Another mistake seems to have been made by police again that same evening. The jury heard that of the 4 people in the search party, only Luke Mitchell's clothing was taken for examination that night. Alice Walker, Jodi's grandmother, had touched Jodi's body. Trace evidence from Jodi's killer could have been transferred onto Alice Walker's clothing. By the time police asked for that clothing a week later, she'd forgotten what she'd been wearing.
Under those circumstances where you've got 3 or 4 people together in a group finding the body in that way, I would very much have been looking to take their clothes and preserving them. That should have been done as a matter of routine at the scene.
Luke Mitchell's clothes were the only clothes taken that evening. He's the only person who's forensically examined that evening. His nails are scraped, hair samples taken, DNA taken. What does that say to you that was going on in the police's mind that evening?
That certainly indicates to me that the investigating officer, the investigative team, were pretty convinced that they had a prime suspect.
When you saw Jodi's injuries, was your first thought, that's strikingly similar to the Black Dahlia murders?
No. It was my idea, I never heard of the Black Dahlia. There were similarities in terms of big slashing wounds caused by a bladed instrument, sharp instrument, in both the deaths, Black Dahlia and Jodi Jones. That's as far as one can take it.
In fact, you would agree there were major dissimilarities as well.
There were major dissimilarities. By no means can one say that because the injuries were in the same sites and caused by the similar way, they therefore must have been produced by somebody with intimate knowledge of the Dahlia murder.
No evidence was found on Mitchell's computer that had visited sites featuring images of the Black Dahlia. In fact, there are real questions as to how much Mitchell knew about Marilyn Manson as well.
What if I told you that all the police managed to seize from his house was one Marilyn Manson CD which had been bought after the murder, and one torn-up calendar? That was it.
Yeah, that
That's
would
not
surprise
an
me.
obsession.
No, that would certainly surprise me, because certainly the impression given was a lot more serious than that.
When you say the impression given, would that have been the impression given by the media?
Well, the way the
By-
media presented it, I would
Yeah.
think. The press tend to use emotive words. If they can use a dramatic word where there's a simple, straightforward word available, they'll always go for the dramatic word.
The effect of this media coverage was devastating for Mitchell's defence.
People will look back on it and think, oh, that's the Black Dahlia, that's the Scottish Black Dahlia case. And yet the connection with the Black Dahlia case was so tenuous as to perhaps even be non-existent.
Luke Mitchell may well be guilty. The jury in that High Court may well have been right. But the holes in this case, the lack of forensics, the flaws in basic police procedures, the focusing on Luke Mitchell as a suspect to the apparent exclusion of all others, together with the undermining of the evidence which was used to blacken his character, all add up to real worries that his conviction as the killer of Jodie Jones is unsafe.
The case is about evidence, solid building blocks of evidence. And for me, I don't see it in this case. And I would be worried that the wrong man was in custody.
What if Luke Mitchell wasn't guilty? How have we portrayed a 14-year-old boy through a process where there is no way back for him in terms of public perception, even if his appeal were to succeed? Luke Mitchell will forever be associated with Marilyn Manson, with the Black Dahlia killing, and you're in a situation now where, for a whole host of reasons, we're left with an unsatisfactory conviction.